All right. Good morning again, everyone. Thank you for joining us on a Saturday morning to talk podcasts. I think I speak for Bill and David when I say it's one of my favorite things to talk about, and always happy to help new podcasters enter the marketplace. If you take one thing from this presentation, I hope it's that podcasting is a lot of fun, gives you the opportunity to make connections that you might not otherwise get to do. So. For those I haven't met, I'm Jenna Spinelli. I work for the McCourtney Institute for Democracy at Penn State. We host and produce the Democracy Works podcast in partnership with WPSU. Delighted to be presenting today with David Pensick, who some of you may know from his time at Schlow, the founder of the Schlow Library podcast, now launching a new podcast for the Jana Marie Foundation. And also Bill Zimmerman, who is an instructor in the Belisario College of Communications at Penn State and host and producer of the Happy Valley Hustle podcast. So I'll let David and Bill tell you a little bit more about their shows as we go along through the presentation. But a huge thank you to Schlow for giving us the opportunity to present and for encouraging things like this in the community. If you have questions throughout the presentation, I was going to say, yeah, you can just put them in the chat and we'll get to them at the end. We will also leave time for questions at the end, so we should have plenty of time, and we are a fairly small group here today, so we should be able to get a good conversation going. So let's dive in. You're all here today because you are on some level thinking about starting a podcast, and it's a good time to do that. The number of people familiar with podcasts keeps going up and up every year, particularly in light of COVID. I think a lot of people found their habits shifting, found themselves looking for content to consume content in different ways than they might have in the before times. So people turned to podcasts, and now, 3/4 of the country is familiar with what podcasts are. In the last year, we've seen people like Michelle Obama enter the podcast world. Joe Rogan, who some of you may know, inked a $100 million, if not more, deal with Spotify for his show. So podcasting has gone from this underground, under the radar thing to very much a big business, and people are becoming more and more familiar with it. They're also listening more. So there are about 155 million people who regularly listen or who have ever listened to a podcast. So more than half the country knows how to listen to a podcast. And again, that continues to grow every year. And about just over a third of the country listens to podcasts monthly. So these are your regular listeners. So there's 100 million people, if not more, out there that you could potentially reach to get your message out to. So that's a huge potential to reach people far beyond the confines of Penn State or State College or wherever you happen to be. I know for our show, we have listeners in all 50 states, all around the world, people who are just interested in democracy beyond the confines of Penn State. So this is a good time, I think, David and Bill, if you wanted to just talk a little bit about kind of the origin stories for your show, how you thought about the people that you might want to reach, given this potential out there in podcasting.
Yeah, I'd be happy to kick it off. My podcast is focused on telling stories of entrepreneurship and innovation. Tends to focus on people in central Pennsylvania, but I've kind of extended beyond that as a because there's people I want to talk to, and also a chance to hopefully grab listeners outside of the region. And my genre is this sort of thing. This is well-traveled territory in the world of podcasts, where pretty early on podcasts focused on personal and professional development. gain steam. So I kind of, had a sense that that was already part of what people like to listen to, spending that time washing dishes in the car, whatever, actually learning something while you do some of the activities you're not too psyched about doing.
Yeah. Yeah, with the Jana Marie Foundation, it's kind of interesting. It's a little different than what I was thinking of when I started the Schlow podcast. With the Jana Marie Foundation, it was, and not that Schlow doesn't do it, when I was doing Schlow, it didn't do this either. It's just for those who aren't familiar with it, it's a local organization, local nonprofit that deals with mental health, and especially mental health with young people, and suicide awareness, and those are pretty weighty topics, and this was just looked at as another way to have conversations, like some difficult conversations, and go in depth, because that's a lot of people with media today, it's just looking at the headlines, looking at clicks. And I think what's great about podcasts, I think why it has become popular, is those topics that you are interested in. You can find a podcast and really go in depth on conversations and hearing about topics that you care about, and you can spend a lot of time having discussions instead of just sound bites. You have really good discussions, and I think that's the Jana Marie Foundation's podcast is called Elephants Heard, and that comes from their Mokita initiative, and in each month they have a Mokita dialogues that used to take place in person but takes place on Zoom now, and each month it's a different topic, and they go really get in-depth conversations about these topics, and that was the inspiration now with the podcast that just launched.
Yeah, there is literally a podcast for everything. David, you and I gave a presentation earlier in the summer where we talked about all the different genres of podcasts out there. But yeah, lots of things out there for sure. And to that point, there are more than 1 million podcasts in Apple's directory right now. So while there are a lot of listeners out there, there's also a lot of competition for their attention. It's a fairly common thing in the podcast world. Are we at peak podcast? Is this the golden age of audio? Is the marketplace too crowded? And this is something where I think it's important to set clear expectations going in. I think people sometimes think that you're going to be the next Serial or what have you and get millions of downloads. We'll talk about metrics at the very end, but more realistically, you're probably going to get hundreds of downloads, maybe thousands if you're lucky. So it's about balancing the level of effort you're going to put into it versus what the expectations are that you're going to get out of it. Just like any new venture you would start, right? It's about what is that return on investment. And I think, like David was saying, podcasts do provide a way to reach people on a more in-depth level. And if you have your expectations framed appropriately, if you only want to reach people in a certain subset and you can reach those people, you are successful. Even if you don't get to the, widespread, mainstream success, I think you can define a vision of success that really works for you or your organization or whoever is producing the show. So how do you know whether or not to dive into podcasting? There's a couple of things to help you decide. When I talk podcasts, and I think when David and Bill have too, people always want to ask us about gear, what microphones, how do you get your audio onto iTunes? And we're going to talk about all those things, but I think this information about how do you know whether to make a podcast, what do you want to say? How do you want to say it? These are the most important things to talk about. If you don't have your goals and objectives and format and some of these things down, to some extent, what microphones you use don't really matter if you don't have all your homework done up front, so to speak. So, Bill, you want to take it over from here and talk about how to survey the landscape, or think about, what do you want to say versus what people might want to hear?
Yeah, sure. It's talking before about whether are we in peak podcasting time, or are we at the the bottom of a giant boom. It's interesting, there in certain industries, whether if you're a comedian or a reporter or something, there's certainly kind of an idea that this thought that everyone has a podcast. So thinking about a niche is really important. Jenna, did the slide get taken down?
Oh, yeah, oh, sorry.
Okay.
I'll put it back up.
Okay, yeah, we'll just keep it up for now, and then
Okay.
I'll move into the Google Trends. Thanks. So yeah, finding a niche is super important. So for me, that was, I acknowledged early on that these entrepreneurship type of, um, professional development type podcasts, there was a bunch of them. So I had to kind of find a niche, and for me, that was just focusing it regionally, which it can be kind of a double-edged sword. It gave me a chance to kind of be to get noticed because there was nothing like this happening locally, but then it also kind of confined me to maybe some limitations on how big the listenership could get. And I've been trying to push against that a little bit by having some guests who aren't affiliated with the region or Penn State in any way, but without kind of neglecting what kind of got me here. But yeah, the thinking about that format up front was important. I was a newspaper reporter for almost a decade. And I really enjoyed one-on-one interviews with people. So this was kind of a chance to scratch that itch. And, it's, with podcasts, like Jenna said, you really do have to kind of temper your expectations. And very, very early on, I kind of recognized that this was not going to be beneficial to me from a money-making standpoint through ads. I was not going to get numbers as far as listeners go that would really stoke my ego. But this had value in other ways. It was going to help me be a better communicator. It was going to help me expand my network. I like to say, give a platform to the cool people I already know, and then help me meet other people. But so I think that's one of the big takeaways I would like to leave with you today, is to really understand how podcasts can be successful in a lot of different ways. We see some businesses getting into this space, and I read a book called Profitable Podcasting that explains this idea of basically the podcast as a Trojan horse. Businesses are putting podcasts out there and using this as a way for lead generation, where they could sit down with somebody who previously maybe they wouldn't even get to answer their calls. But if you say, hey, we'd like to interview you for our podcast, then you start to make that connection, and then maybe you follow up and offer them your services. So there's a lot of different ways this can be applied. And there's a lot of different services out there or ways that you can kind of do your research and find something that, find a topic that fits for you. If you are not famous, if you do not have the backing of a major podcast network or the ESPNs or NPRs of the world, it's going to be tough to build an audience. And the best way to do that is to kind of find a niche. A great place to go for this sort of thing can be Google Trends. If you've never been on here before, it's a very accessible platform. It's not it's not as intimidating as something like Google Analytics. It's just a way for you to kind of get a sense of what the world is searching for. So this could be kind of the first place you could go to kind of test a topic. So the idea that I'm going to use here, I'm going to use the term fidget spinner. If you remember, they had their brief moment in kind of mainstream news to kind of help people who fidget a lot, having this thing, putting it between your thumb and your index finger and spinning away. Say for some crazy reason you were going to do a podcast on fidget spinners. What do you think at this moment that would be a good idea? Well, the Google Trends data shows, we're going to look at the last 5 years. This right here is showing that this is a pretty poor podcast idea, that fidget spinners had a very brief moment of relevance in 2017, and then it just went off a cliff. Ideally, if your topic, your idea should be fairly straight across. Maybe there's some peaks and valleys a little bit, but there's no significant spikes like this. So this can be a great place to start. There is also a website where you can search Reddit conversations. So if you're not, Reddit calls itself the front page of the internet. It's a very kind of internet message board on steroids. You can also use search tools to kind of see what conversations are happening in various subreddits that are set up around different topics. So you could go into the entrepreneurship subreddit and see the terms that come up the most frequently in those conversations. And that can give you a sense of maybe where you could go. And there may be some niches there, some demands that aren't being met in the podcasting space. And that could be your opportunity.
Yeah. Yeah, and I mean, I'll say for us on Democracy Works, after the 2016 election, There was a whole glut of books being written about democracy. Those books are still being put out today. I think Schlow could probably fill an entire section of the library if they haven't already. But when we started our show in 2018, we didn't really see anybody having those types of conversations in the podcast world. So we saw an opportunity and we jumped on it. And since then, there have been a lot of other shows that have come online, but I think we were one of the first, and that's a value too, to the point of if someone else is already out there doing it, you don't necessarily want to, replicate what's out there. It's really more about how you can see what other people are doing and put your own spin on it. And David, I know when you were starting the Schlow podcast, you looked to a lot of other library podcasts. So what did that kind of benchmarking process look like for you?
Yeah, because I just wanted to see mostly what kind of format they were doing. And one thing I would add is if you do find someone doing a podcast on a topic you like, I wouldn't be afraid to reach out to the people who are doing the podcast. What I found, and I'm sure Bill and Jenna could attest to, is the podcast community is a pretty generous community. They want to help each other. At least that's, been my experience. I talked with Bill a lot in getting background before I launched the Schlow podcast, and Jenna too. And there was just, unless you're going to launch something that's a direct competition, maybe, but for the most part, reach out to people who are maybe doing podcasts that are or sort of similar or on a topic you like, and in terms and see what they're doing, or at least take a listen and the format. The library ones I looked at, they were, mostly it ran the gamut, and in terms of just having author talks, talking about. They would bring in different librarians to talk about things. And that's with Schlow. I wanted, a vehicle to promote the library and what was happening at the library. So I would bring in, guests that were having either something happen at the library, an artist or an author visit, or just some general topic that concerned the library. So, but I would definitely encourage, do a search on podcasts on a topic that you are thinking about launching one. See what's out there, maybe talk to people who are doing it, and see if, okay, is there a room for me to have something in that genre?
Mm-hmm. And that's also a great way to plant the seeds for cross promotion. Podcasts promoting each other is huge in this space, especially among smaller shows, as Bill was saying, the types that are not going to have the threshold to get to major advertisers. When these, kind of one-on-one cross promotions between similar shows is a great way to reach new listeners, and, reaching out to have some of those conversations is a good way to do it. And, the other thing about this is be open to the fact that maybe starting your own podcast isn't the right thing. Maybe if between your research of what's already out there and Google Trends, or, searches on Reddit and all of those things, maybe the market is too saturated, or maybe the thing you want to talk about did have its moment. And so I think then it's about shifting the strategy to think about, okay, is there some other type of media we could use, or can we maybe try to get whether it's yourself or someone from your organization booked as a guest on other podcasts to try to spread the word about what you're doing on their shows, as opposed to trying to start your own. So just be open to having those different conversations and being flexible based on what your research uncovers.
And Jen, can I say one
Yeah.
thing real quick? And that's why maybe thinking about a local, like, because I have friends who work in radio here, but local radio is really, there isn't anymore a real talk show of local radio, and mostly it's music and some banter from the DJs, but there isn't really good local talk, unless maybe Penn State football. I guess there's some shows, but and that's why I give, Bill started Happy Valley Hustle. He got local, and then he's branched out. I think that's a good way to maybe start, because the market isn't maybe as, compact. There's something here locally that you can talk about, and then maybe see if you can branch out from there.
Yeah. Great idea, David. And so the other thing is thinking about what you want to get out of it. Podcasting is a lot of work. We're going to talk about that here in just a minute, but it is a way to get the word out about activities. And I think about it a lot as punching above your weight class. Like, I reached out to people that I would have no business talking to otherwise, whether it's authors or other academics or thought leaders, other organizations. We have a partnership with the George W. Bush Presidential Center, which I don't know, they have like 500,000 followers on Twitter or something, but they have a podcast too. And so just like David was saying, you reach out to people and they're happy to talk and collaborate. And that's been really lucrative for us. And so there is this way, this kind of community sense, even though there are lots of podcasters out there. But how do you guys keep track of setting those goals and keeping your eye on the big picture while you're sort of in the grind of putting out episodes?
Yeah, I will say, Jenna later on is going to show the industry averages for what what an episode gets for downloads, for listens, and I'm below average, and it gnaws at me and sometimes makes me think, why do I even bother with this thing? But the best way that I've had for measuring success are the opportunities that come out of the podcast. Like I said, expanding a network, getting better at communications. This is, for me, as a lecturer at Penn State, it's also been kind of a differentiator. My dean is aware that I do this podcast. They like that I'm making content, and then I take lessons from that experience and bring it into the classroom. So that has all really worked well from a personal branding standpoint. And that's where I really think, stop thinking of a podcast as a way to potentially make money through sponsorship, or as a way to really, feel good about yourself because you're getting giant numbers. It's really about exposure, and you can use that to help yourself get a better job, use that to help you connect with potential clients. So I think that's the real big thing. And you also need to appreciate small victories. It's kind of funny. The universe sometimes has a way when you're feeling the lowest about your podcast, and then somebody shoots you a text and says they really liked your last episode. So really kind of take those little things. Take a moment after you, like Jenna said, punched above your weight class and got a great guest. Actually take a second and breathe and acknowledge what you just did, what you just accomplished. Because sometimes you don't even take a time to do that because you're so focused on getting it edited, packaging it up, figuring out a compelling way to kind of promote it. And you don't even take the time to kind of acknowledge that, hey, this was pretty cool. And this all came about because I committed to this podcast.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. David, do you have anything to add there?
Yeah, just if people aren't getting this has got to be a labor of love for people. I mean, basically very few people, I don't know how many, but you're not probably going to be making money off of this. It's got to be something you really are passionate about and doing. And like with me, the two podcasts that I've worked on have been so focused on local organizations that it's I don't try not to get caught up in numbers, because I know it's a very small market that would be attractive to the things that I've done either with Schlow or now with the Jana Marie Foundation. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Okay. So that's kind of some food for thought to, hopefully we haven't talked you out of it completely at this point. I know that we've said that the listeners probably aren't going to be as many as you like, but that's no reason not to do it. And so hopefully you have some tools to put in your toolbox to do that due diligence. Think about what your format and your tone are going to be. One last thing I'll say on format is think about like what your strengths are or what your organization's strengths are. So for our show, I host it with several faculty in our institute. So I have a journalism background. They come from more the scholarly side of things. So they do like a roundtable discussion, and then I do an interview. And it's a great way to do something that's a little bit different than just your standard interview podcast. It brings a little bit more of that academic rigor, but still keeps things fairly accessible. So that format has been kind of a differentiator for us as well. So now we're going to talk about actually making it happen, the things that everybody always wants to talk about. How do you get, from your recorded file, how do you get it to Apple and Spotify, and how do you get it edited and all those things? So There are lots of options. You can really record and publish a podcast directly from your phone. And I know people who have done this. You don't need any type of fancy gear. If you are not as concerned about the audio quality or those kind of things, you just want to do it for yourself and your friends and your family, that's perfectly valid. You can do it for free with tools you already have. But if you do want to, if you're doing it on behalf of an organization or something that's in a more professional capacity, there are some ways that you can record, again, without spending a lot of money, maybe spending a little bit of time to really get that higher audio quality. So we produce Democracy Works in collaboration with WPSU. So I'm not the best person to talk about some of this stuff because we're lucky enough to have their team do a lot of that work for us. So Bill, David, how do you guys think about recording and editing your shows?
Yeah, I mean, I started off with a clip-on lavalier mics that I got for $30 on Amazon, and they plug into where your headphones go on your phone. So I used that to record. Eventually bought a USB microphone to plug into my laptop to record, intros and outros. So yeah, I mean, really start small. I've heard it put before, the fear of gear sometimes prevents people from doing these things. They don't want to do it until they get all the right gear, and that's not the approach. And I think anyone who's maybe ever purchased a DSLR camera thinking it was going to make them a photographer, and now they have that thing collecting dust, they can relate to this sort of thing. So start off small, minimum investment, and just see if this is something you're able to stick with, and then you can keep ramping up your investment into better things. And even it's more important just to kind of find a quiet space. Don't record in a room with bare floors. Podcasters record in their cars, in their closets. So there's ways you can really shoestring this until and incrementally make more investments and make it sound a little better.
Yeah, I agree. Like I was fortunate when I set Schlow, they had like a Yeti, and so I was able to use that and plug it in. But yeah, you can get good recording equipment at pretty reasonable prices. So that is definitely, and then if you find out you can continue doing this and want to invest more, then go that route. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think a pretty typical setup for most podcasters, just like you were saying, Bill, or some type of microphone you can get that plugs into your computer. So the Blue Yeti is one popular one. I have one. It's an Audio-Technica 2100. They're each about $100 on Amazon, and you can plug them directly into your computer. And in this remote world, you can record on Zoom, just like we're doing today. You would just take the audio. I use a service called Zencaster for remote interviews, which is a lot like Zoom, except there's no video. It's a little bit more optimized for podcasting, and they have a free version that's open to anyone. So if you even just want to get on and practice and try it out. I know some people use a service called Squadcast, which is again another remote recording service. You can use Skype, any service that will capture audio recording. And then, no matter what you do, you need to practice. Unless you are already like a radio professional or something, you're not going to be as good on the mic as you think you are. It took me, about 6 months before I really, really felt comfortable. And we did a couple of practice or pilot episodes before we ever published anything. And that's really important, just to get, figure out, nail down that format. And what is your tone going to be? Are you going to have any banter? Are you going to just get right to it? How do you think about those kind of things? So definitely make sure that you practice and listen back. And we'll talk about that here in a second. And then, editing is its whole other thing. You can kind of you get out of it what you put into it. You also need to think about not just your interview or your discussion. What kind of music are you going to use? What is the first thing people are going to hear? What is the last thing people are going to hear? My colleagues at WPSU have this expression, how do you get from black to black? I think it comes from the TV world, but there's the black screen, and then what's the first thing someone sees, and then at the end as the credits roll, what do they hear, how do you kind of wrap things up at the end? So Bill, I know you and I were talking before this, you've had a change of thought about editing recently. What has that process been like for you?
Yeah, over the last few months, I've taken been much more involved in the editing process. In the past, I would go back and edit out if somebody had a coughing fit, or wanted to take another stab at a question, or there was an interruption, and that was the only thing I usually cut. And now I'm trying to be much more involved with that, because I had some guests who who I think had a lot of great things to say, but maybe leaned a little bit too much on uhs and ums, through their interview. And I didn't want the listener to go away with their main takeaway being, oh, that person said and a lot. So I see it as a way of, it's a service to the listener and also to the guest to do some editing, to tighten things up in spots. Even sometimes something as simple as uhs and ums and shortening some pauses could take a few minutes off a podcast too. So I think that's, in trying to shorten things up is always the right move. Mm-hmm. So yeah, I see it as, and I've heard this advice recently that when it comes to the uhs and ums, take out about 75%. Where you're not totally sanitizing it. It still sounds real and conversational, but it's not to the point of distraction. So that's been my approach. And yeah, sometimes people will go on tangents. Sometimes people maybe feel a need to name drop, and more when I say that of giving credit maybe to, well, this person worked on this project, and sometimes there's maybe some details that don't really add much. So I'll take out some small things like that. But most of the time it's just cleaning things up a little bit. And I think everybody comes out sounding better for it. And I think it makes it much more listenable.
Yeah, you're kind of making people sound like the best versions of themselves. I do that too. Academics can be quite long-winded. That doesn't come as a surprise to many of you, I'm sure. So just helping them, sound a little bit more concise sometimes is good. As far as actual tools to use, there's a program called Audacity, which is free to download. Anybody at Penn State has access to the Adobe suite, so you can use Adobe Audition. You can also use GarageBand. Those are, I think, the three kind of big audio editing platforms. But no matter what you do, you have to think about it sort of like an athlete does, where they go back and watch the tape of the game. Funny that I'm making so many sports metaphors today. I'm like the least sports fan you'd ever want to meet, but it's a good metaphor here. You need to go back and listen to yourself. It's tough to hear your own voice sometimes. I don't think anybody really likes that. But you're never going to know how you present yourself. How many times do you say and you're never really going to know unless you go back and listen. So you have to get over some of that, or at least figure out a way to cope with it, and listen critically to yourself and make sure that you're putting out the best thing possible. Because in a world where there are a million different options out there, if somebody doesn't like what you're putting out, if there are too many ums, or their audio quality isn't good, and there's umpteen number of choices, there's infinite choices that they can go out there and find. So you don't want to give people a reason to tune out or to unsubscribe because of audio things that you could easily fix with just a little bit of time investment. And then,
all right. I just want to say, when you're listening to yourself, don't be listening like if you have the best talking voice, singing voice, but listen to how, are you sounding, without the ums and stuff. Because I was just thinking, Adam Carolla has a popular podcast, and no one's going to say he has like the best voice in the world, but he has a great podcast, or a popular one of it. And so just, listen, are you sounding, do you sound like an authority on the topic you're discussing? And, do you sound passionate about it? That will what come out in the podcast.
Mm-hmm, for sure. And then you have to think about how to package your show. So you have your audio, you're maybe edited it, you put some time in there, but you're not done yet. You have to actually get it out there in the world. And some of that comes from your cover art, what categories you put it in on the podcast apps and platforms, how you describe your show, which can be kind of tough. It really, if you don't have your goals and those things outlined, it's really hard to write a concise description of your show. You have to write some type of notes to give listeners an idea of what they're going to hear. So all of this takes time, and it's something that you should budget into your production schedule, so to speak, and really put some time into. Don't just like whip something up and throw it out there, put one sentence show notes out there, because again, people have so many choices, and if they don't know what they're going to get, or have a good sense of what your show is about, they're just going to skip over it and go to something else. So yeah,
sorry, Jenna. Yeah, how important that is, and it really is easy for it to be an afterthought, because you're tired of it. You're probably already tired of the episode. You record it, you edit it, those sorts of things. A nifty trick that I try to do, and I got this advice from a former editor of Men's Health magazine. So you can imagine how well those magazines do in writing headlines. Try to get you or your work in there somewhere, and maybe the title or the show notes. Really just make everything you do listener focused, trying to call attention to what they can get out of the episode.
Yeah, keeping the focus on your listener is super important. Yeah, it's not all about you. As much as we've been talking about the benefits that podcasting can bring you, the content should really be focused on the listener. And then there are lots of, as far as the mechanics of getting your show onto all the podcast platforms, there's a whole bunch of services that can do that for you. Things like SoundCloud and Anchor are free, so you just upload your audio and they take care of sending it to Apple and Spotify and Stitcher and all of the apps. If you pay, there are some, or if you pay $10 or $5 or $20 a month, you can get some add-ons in terms of analytics and enhanced distribution and advertising options, and some will even give you a website for your podcast. So I would say just do your homework. If you Google podcast hosting platforms, you can find articles comparing them, and charts that go over what each service provides. So just look at these things and figure out what's going to be the best for you, and given your price and how many episodes you want to put out, and what additional features you might need.
I want to give a thumbs up to Buzzsprout as well, and something else I would encourage you to look at when you're making your decision. Look at the resources that they offer. Buzzsprout puts out a podcast. They have a Facebook group. They're constantly writing blog articles, and I've hopped on calls a few times with some of their upper staff, just not necessarily for advice on how to use the platform, just advice on podcasting in general. And their mission statement is to empower the USB mic podcasters, so people who aren't recording in big studios. So a lot of these services, they put a lot of intention into trying to keep you using their services. So they're going to offer a lot of support. So maybe add that into your research. What kind of resources and assistance could they offer going forward?
Yeah, great points. And then it's time to launch. You've got your hosting, you've got hopefully your cover art and all of those things, and it's time to get out in the world. And if a podcast goes on iTunes, will anyone hear it? This is where your promotional plan comes into play. So do you guys want to talk about some of the ways that you've approached promoting your shows?
Yeah, we've with the Jana Marie one, we did a little 2-minute intro podcast that we got out and plus when you go onto these sites, I don't know if, I'm guessing that especially with Buzzsprout, if you want to get on Apple, you have to have an episode already to get on. So it's good to maybe just do a 1 or 2 minute sort of intro one, and then you send that out, and then they'll approve it for their directory for Apple Podcasts. And then when you have your first real one, then it'll automatically go out. So obviously using social media, and just that's been a big thing. And especially if you have guests, then you can tag them, like Bill's mentioned, and get, so hopefully they'll help with the promotion of it too. just getting the word out about it and putting it on the websites. Like I know Schlow's on the Schlow Library website. Jana Marie's going to be on their website. So just using all the vehicles that you can.
Mhm.
Yeah, that's a great point, David. Yeah, because I think what I found too is there's no really magic bullet that's going to get you a bunch of listeners. Unlike YouTube, where you could have a viral video that just gets you hundreds of tens of thousands of subscribers. I think with podcasting, it's much more of a slow burn, and it takes a collection of a lot of little things from getting. We were all featured in a feature story in Town and Gown, and I don't know about David or Jenna's experience, but I didn't think that it didn't move the needle at all for me for as far as listens go. But I don't doubt that it wasn't a good thing to kind of establish credibility of the show. So yeah, getting a guest to share it on their social media platform is great. Putting it out on your own social media is great. Getting some press, talking it up at events like this, all of those things need to work out. There's really just not one thing that's going to just launch you into the stratosphere.
Mm-hmm.
Although there is some advertising within some of the podcasting apps that I'm told can get you a nice jump in listeners, but you're going to be paying a few $100s for that.
Yeah, it's one of those things, if you have the money, you can spend the money. If you have the time, spend the time. If you don't have the time or the money to promote a podcast, then maybe you shouldn't be doing it. That's something I tell people a lot is, it really, to build an audience, it either takes time or money or both. Just to reiterate, that trailer, that intro episode is super important, both from a technical perspective to get your show onto the platforms, but also to give people an idea of what your show is about, just like a trailer for a movie, right? You want to give people an idea of what they're going to hear, make them want to subscribe and get your episodes on a regular basis. My biggest thing I wish we would have done when we launched Democracy Works, so we launched with a trailer and 1 episode. I wish we would have launched with a trailer and like 2 or 3 episodes, just to give people a good, they have a couple episodes they can binge, or just to really give a feel for what we were doing. I've heard from shows that have done that really is a good way to help build that listener base early on, get people coming back. And it also helps get your show on the radar. Just about every podcast platform has staff who work in curation. So if you go into Apple Podcasts and you see the new and noteworthy, or you see they have a list together about whatever topic, there's someone at those apps and platforms that puts those lists together. So if you can put yourself out there, have a clear description, a trailer, some quality episodes, you stand a much, much better chance of getting featured on the homepages of those apps. And then, once you have your first couple of episodes out there, it's really important to pick a schedule and stick to it. One common pitfall in podcasting is just kind of putting out an episode whenever you feel like it, which is maybe fine for you, but if you're trying to create listener behavior, that's not really good if they don't know when to expect your show. So, Democracy Works comes out on Monday mornings, and I've had people email me and tell me that they look forward to starting their Monday morning commute with us, or that they queue it up when they go walk their dog on a Monday morning. And so it's kind of humbling in some respects to think that I'm part of someone's weekly routine. But if you don't put your content out consistently, it's really hard to build those listener behaviors and keep people coming back. I think some other common pitfalls, aimless banter. You are not as entertaining as you probably think you are. So try to keep that to a minimum. I think that really only works in celebrity podcasts because they already have a following. If you're just a regular person, people probably are not going to be as interested in what you were up to over the weekend, or what your kids are doing, or any of those kind of things. The other thing, Bill, I know this one came from you, forgetting the listener. So how do you keep the listener top of mind when you're working on your episodes?
I'm a big fan of creating a listener persona. you know, given what you know about the people who are listening or the audience you want to reach, creating a fictional character, give them a headshot, give them a fun name, and write a few sentences about their habits and their hopes and fears and those sorts of things, and then just have them as a reference point every time you're about to record an episode, every time you're going to write your description or write your headline. Be asking yourself, does this have that person's best interests in mind? That could be a good way to help you keep zeroing in. And also, while you're recording too, there's going to be times where somebody may make a reference to something. They may use an acronym, and you need to be the listener's advocate and step up and ask them to elaborate or explain what that means. Or you just come in and add, if you know what that acronym is, say, oh yeah, by the way, you're talking about this, right? So that's another thing to just really kind of, have that listener's photograph right on your desk while you're recording.
Mm-hmm. And then, I know we've been talking about social media here, and you should certainly, put your show out on social media. But I found at least that's not going to get you, just like Bill said, there's no silver bullet here that's going to get you a lot of listeners. Even when we've had guests share episodes that have larger followings, that we see a small bump, maybe a couple dozen more downloads for those episodes. But, think about what you're doing when you're on social media. If you're scrolling your phone, you're sometimes not in a place where you're like, oh yes, I can just listen to a 40-minute podcast right now. It's a different behavior stream than listening to a podcast. So just keep that in mind. And, social media is definitely great for awareness building and those kind of things. But again, don't look at it as your only way to promote your show. I think, cross promoting with other podcasts is a great way to get the word out there. Thinking about who is going to listen to your show and where do those people hang out. Maybe it's a subreddit, maybe it's a professional organization. There's an association out there for everything. I've had good success, emailing the marketing contacts at various professional groups and having them put our episodes in their newsletters or those types of things, and really getting into that target audience that you want to reach. To Bill's point about a listener persona, take that out. What media outlets does this person follow? What communities are they part of online? Where do they get their information? How, and think about through the lens of that persona, where can you reach the person that you want to talk to?
Jenna, real quick, with social media promotion, and one thing Buzzsprout does, and maybe other platforms do that's great, is you can create like a video, a sound clip. Like if someone says something really great, you can just have that audio clip, sort of like a movie trailer, something, just the best, and put it on, your Facebook or whatever. And so the people hear like a 10-sec or, 30-second quote, someone said this thing, and that might entice them to then, hey, I want to hear that entire episode.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think a lot of the podcast apps offer those types of services. Yeah, it's kind of like that trailer mentality, right? Give them a little bite-sized thing, and then hopefully they'll listen to the whole thing. So we've been teasing these metrics through the whole presentation here. We're just going to wrap up. So the median number of downloads per episode is 140. This is from Libsyn, one of the podcast hosts. They have a show called The Feed, where they recap these numbers on a monthly basis. So they always say, if you have more than the median, you're doing better than half the shows out there. So this is important as you're setting those expectations and you're making the case. I think a lot of us would say that if we had an in-person event or a Zoom event and we got 140 people to show up to it, we would consider that a resounding success. But for some reason, when we're thinking about podcasts, we don't necessarily think of that in that same way. I think a lot of people still have that notion that we're going to be Joe Rogan and get millions of downloads. If you can reframe it that way, where you're having 140 people devote their time to you on a consistent basis. I think in today's media world, attention is by far the biggest commodity that we have. And so if you can capture their attention in that deep, sustained way that David was talking about, the benefits, it's more of a quantity over more of a quality over quantity type of thing. So I think, reaching 140 people with really good engaging content is better than reaching, more than that, but with only that quick kind of superficial type of thing, specific, especially for organizations that want to cultivate those deeper relationships within your communities. So that is my rant about podcast metrics. You guys have anything to add to that before we go to resources and wrap up? Okay. And you can subscribe to the Feed podcast to find those metrics every month. Those charts I showed at the beginning were from Edison Research, which is a market research company that does a lot of work specifically in podcasting. That there are links here to find all of our respective shows that we've been talking about. So hope you'll check us out. And don't hesitate to reach out to us if you have any questions. We do have about 10 minutes left for questions. So if you want to just unmute and ask or pop them in the chat, happy to answer any questions you have. I'll put that back up actually. Or if anybody wants to share an idea for a podcast that you're thinking about starting, we can maybe give you some feedback on it. No pressure or anything. Sean, go ahead.
So what's your question?
Those websites that we could post stuff on, are they usually kid safe?
Louder.
Huh?
For the podcast resources, was it Jenna? Can you maybe put the previous?
Yeah. Yep.
There?
Instead of gonna make a podcast for kids.
Oh, podcast for kids. We didn't talk about that. Yeah, there's lots of kids that have their own podcasts. Yeah, we, like I said, we didn't talk about that, but if you want to send me an email, I'd be happy to point you in the direction of people I know who work in that space. But yeah, I think all of our podcasts, all the resources that we've mentioned are kid safe, and there are some ones that specifically are for kids too. What do you want to make your podcast about?
It's sort of just gonna be like me. Like, I have a couple of friends that could just come over to help me with stuff. Like, I was trying to make a podcast, but I couldn't find somewhere to launch it. I was trying to make a podcast with me and my friend Ryan, who lives like a neighborhood over. We were doing art together, and then I went to his house after that, and then we were trying to shoot another podcast with us baking.
Oh, okay, so more like a video.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I mean, like we said, there's SoundCloud, I know is a free platform. Anybody can put stuff up on there for free. Lots of musicians do that. They put their stuff up on there. So that might be one place to start.
Anchor is another good one that you could use on your phone or your computer. And that also reminds me, that's a good point too. I've heard from people that use the podcast as just a way to connect with friends, where it could be just kind of a fun medium to catch up with people that maybe live across the country. And you make this with no intention of trying to build an audience. So that could be a thing too. Just as this can just be just a really fun thing to do with your friends.
Yeah, I know. There was a podcast I was listening to. The dad did a podcast with his daughter, and it was just the conversations they had on, what was going on in the world and stuff. And it's really interesting. I don't know. I don't think he expected, I don't think he was expecting it to be anything major, but it was just a good way even for parents that connect,
Mhm.
connect with kids. I've done I haven't posted them, but I had conversations with my son. We pretended we were doing a podcast and just recording and just, because that for as a parent was kind of cool because he opens up more if he thinks he's getting recorded and going to be than if I was just saying, hey, how was your day, Ryan? Or
Yeah.
something.
Yeah, there's a whole genre too of people using them for not genealogy, but like preserving stories from their grandparents and things, as people that might be like on the verge of Alzheimer's or dementia, like recording some of those family stories, getting, digital preservation of family history and those kind of things. I know people are using podcasts for that too.
There's a
Well,
question in the chat box there from.
oh yeah. Well, Sean, keep us posted. Okay. We want to hear your podcast when it comes out. Send us an email. So question here from Sarah, interested in creating her own podcast, also interested in lead generation for large organizations or companies. So I don't think that either of the three of us have that. I mean, so I can speak to it from, we have had listeners from our podcast come to events that we've had and, either in person or virtually, or join our email list and those kinds of things. I know that is in the business world. It's like it's a good way to establish thought leadership, so you can get on the radar of people who are out there. And then if you have a course to promote or something like that, it is sort of that top of funnel to get people interested. It's not a commercial by any means for what you're doing. It really is, the same thing. You might write a LinkedIn article or something. It's like the audio equivalent of that. It's not a direct sales pitch, but it gets people interested, gets you on their radar. And then maybe the next step is to sign up for your newsletter. And then maybe the next step is to like read your white paper or your case study. And then the next step from there is to schedule a demo or have a consult. So I think that it's, definitely a top of funnel type of thing.
Yeah, there's some brands that are doing some cool stuff, and all of them are producing episodes that are not that may not even have a single sales message, and they're just focused on providing a resource or entertainment. And sometimes they'll just do a limited series. They're often interview based, like I mentioned earlier, because that could be a way to create a business contact.
Mm-hmm.
And like Jenna said, connect it with a sales funnel and connect it with mission statements and vision statements and organizational goals. It should not operate independently of those things. And yeah, I mean, just take the sales funnel and you can see ways how a podcast can fit into each individual level. Of course, at the first one, it's about getting attention, but every step of that can be enhanced with podcasting.
Yeah, I'm putting a couple resources in the chat. Marketing Showrunners and the Casted podcast both talk about this, like where podcasting fits within your overall marketing or content strategy for your business.
Hey, if I could,
Yeah.
thank you guys for doing this. I'd like to point out that the Media Commons at at Penn State has a portal of resources. So if people are wondering where they can get music that they can use without credit or in Creative Commons, that's a great place that they can source all sorts of stuff.
Yeah, I'm teaching a freshman seminar class on podcasting and encouraging them to use One Button Studio in the Media Commons in the library as well, which is do a video trailer for your podcast. Penn State One Button Studio takes care of the sound and the lighting. So that's a great resource there too. Thanks, Ben.
And I believe it's mediacommons.psu.edu.
The link I just posted is from Buzzsprout. They have like some of the top sites where you can get free music. So if that helps.
Great. Well, we have 1 minute left. Any last questions for the good of the order?
I have a quick question. Hi, my name is Nina. Thanks so much for doing this. This is a great way to wake up on Saturday, actually. And my friend Sarah, who's on the call, so I'm shouting her out too. We're thinking about doing a podcast together. So I'm wondering if you have any recommendations or like how different the process might be for 2 hosts and a guest versus one and a guest, or like if there's any that you'd recommend listening to as kind of an example of what that might look like.
Actually, the one I just started with, the Jana Marie Foundation, I'm a co-host with the founder of the Jana Marie Foundation, Marissa Fitzgerald. And not that this is the expert way to do it, but what we do is just an intro where we the two of us just have some banter, but banter about the specific topic. Like we did something about finding calm or whatever in these crazy times, and what each of us do, and just have a little conversation. And then that leads into the interview that we did with a couple of people. And then we come back for what I call the outro, and just had some more banter between us. And I think that's a real opportunity, because you can allow each of your personalities to come out. And then, I mean, I don't know what you're planning on doing, but, and you can play off each other. Like I was a journalism major. And so it helps me, because I do better when I'm responding to what someone says than just filling time myself. So I think you can use that to your advantage.
Yeah, I like this podcast, Building a Story Brand by Donald Miller. And an interesting way he handles it is there's a co-host, and they have a talk about the guest at the beginning and at the end, but the interview with the guest is just done by Donald. So that could be a thing as well. If one of you are more have more of a knack for interviewing people, you could take care of that. And then you can kind of unpack it at the end, or maybe set up the interview and have that talk with your friend to get it started.
I listened to one too called Happier with Gretchen Rubin and her sister. I don't know. There are a lot out there that are too, but I think it's fun that they play off of each other. So from the friend standpoint, this is a sister standpoint, but I think, it's neat.
Yeah, and the other one I would add that might be kind of more in line with what you guys are thinking, it's called Call Your Girlfriend. It's two people who they call themselves remote BFFs. They live on opposite sides of the country, but they have banter at the beginning. They talk about what they've been up to and all this, and then they usually bring in a guest and then come back at the end. This kind of like intro, interview, outro is a fairly common format. And you guys already know it. Great. Yeah, Call Your Girlfriend.
Their book is really good too. I just got it, Big Friendship. It's about.
Oh yeah, I haven't read it yet, but I want to.
So good.
That's a great point too, of the creativity that some podcasters do is now you're seeing them spun into books very, very easily. Guy Raz, who's How I Built This Podcast, is super popular. Just put a book out, basically just kind of a compilation of all the wisdom that all of his guests shared. Gary Vaynerchuk is another guy, a marketing expert, that just does a great job of collecting content and then distributing it through various channels. So that's another thing. This could be a tool for compiling research, input, insights that could be spun into something later.
For sure.
Do you mind if I give one little, someone was asking about organizations and kind of broad, big organizations. If you don't know Jim Stengel, he's a Penn State alum. He has a podcast called the CMO Podcast, and he was the global brand manager for Procter & Gamble worldwide. So he's got huge marketing background, but he interviews a lot of really interesting people from organizations and brands. That might be helpful to the person that was looking for. It's called the CMO Podcast, and because he has a Penn State connection, it's kind of neat.
Cool.
Yeah.
Last thing, David, I want to give you the last word. I know you have a very much non-podcasting event happening tonight, but might be fun nonetheless.
Well, yeah, just a little plug. Today is World Mental Health Day, and so a Jana Marie Foundation's a big day. On Facebook Live, we're having a concert event. It's called Philosophy of Hope 2 concert. The Philosophy of Hope 1 was last year and was live at the State Theater. Obviously not doing that this year, but it's on Facebook Live at 8 p.m. tonight on the Jana Marie Foundation page. Philosophy of Hope 2, some great acts performing, and it's free to watch, but if you can also donate to the Jana Marie Foundation.
Great. All right. Well, it seems like you guys are already forging some good connections in the chats. That was great to see. Hopefully you all will continue on your podcasting journeys, and please keep us posted along the way. And thank you all for starting your weekend with us, and enjoy the rest of your Saturday. Take care.
Yeah. Thanks, everyone. Happy podcasting.